We've been to countries all over the world.
Je serai, tu seras.
Delivered shelter and supplies to nearly 1 million disaster survivors. And yet there's nothing quite as rewarding as when a shelter box becomes just another box. See what goes in. Help send one out. Learn how at shelterboxusa.org.
Visit Elmhurst.org to explore the new City of Elmhurst website. Find out the latest Elmhurst news, pay utility bills and parking tickets, report concerns, and much more. Elmhurst.org is an ideal way to discover what Elmhurst offers your business, your family, your life.
Welcome to Elmhurst Now, the stories of the people of Elmhurst, Illinois. I'm Ken Bartels, your host this evening, and with me is Mike Kopp, the fire chief and assistant city manager. And we're going to talk in this first segment tonight about flooding. Not a happy topic by any means, but a topic nonetheless. We had significant rains in May and in June, and of course a very dynamic event in July that resulted in floods and great catastrophe in some ways to many of our citizens. Now, Mike, quite frankly, when you get these acts of God, there's not a system in the world that can take some of the volumes of rain that I heard reported came down in this storm, particularly the July one.
That's true. I mean, the storm we had in July, we had over 7 inches of rain in between 6 and 8 hours. That's well over a 100-year event. If you extrapolate out to the event we had in '87 for a 24-hour period, it's probably more rain in the July event that we had in '87.
Yeah, statistically, in some ways, the rain of July 23 and 24 was more significant in some ways than the '87 flood was because of the length of time that it came down in. I think what a lot of people would like to know, and I need for a point of clarification, Mike Kopp and I are talking, it's August 17, and you're going to be viewing this in September. I don't normally do that on Elmhurst Now programs, but I think it's important that if you're watching this, what you're going to be hearing from Mike on the status of things is very likely to be a very dynamic and fluid experience. Things will be different, things will change, things will move forward. But I know the city council, the city staff are spending significant time on this situation, and perhaps you could give us just a quick status report.
Yeah, recently, just as of last night, the city council met just on this flooding issue alone, and a couple things that have happened is we've agreed to hire a consulting engineer to help us evaluate the whole system. They're going to do a comprehensive study of the whole system, and then at that time evaluate what corrections or what systems we put in to help the system we have right now. We'll look at those. There'll be some short-term things we'll do. There'll be some long-term things we do. But as of right now, staff right now, if you have a problem, if you had a flooding problem, our engineering department will come out and help you evaluate your own home and maybe some things you can do in your own home. There's a bunch of information on our website, elmhurst.org. There's even the DuPage County was declared a disaster by the state of Illinois. We're now petitioning the federal government to declare it a disaster. If that's the case, there'll be possibly some loan money for people to help rebuild. At this time, if you would check our website, there is a program in Illinois where you can get a low-interest loan to help you rebuild.
I think there's also considerable interest in the mayor's thoughts concerning a task force on flooding. I'm not even sure that's the proper term, but a citizen task force looking at options and prioritizations.
Yes, exactly right. The mayor is looking for a task force of Elmhurst residents to evaluate what Elmhurst has right now, what we can do, and there's anybody that's a resident of Elmhurst is welcome to apply to be on the task force. You can go on our website again, elmhurst.org. There's an application there. Fill it out, submit it to the mayor, and he will be choosing that task force hopefully within the next couple of weeks. That task force will work alongside staff, alongside the new engineer that we're going to hire to evaluate the system and just try to come up with a plan.
Now, the system was evaluated in the 1990s as well, which was about 10 years after the 1987 floods. You recall, Mike, anything coming out of that evaluation in I think it was 1996?
Correct. There was the Harza study. In fact, again, back to the website, there's some information on the Harza study on our website. And it looked at specific areas. It looked at the whole system, at specific areas and things that could be done. There are still some things that weren't done through that study, but there are a lot of things that were done as far as aligning programs, things of that nature. Again, we'll probably do the same thing. We'll use that maybe as a foundation for the task force. You know, here's where we are right now. What can we do to improve the system?
Well, and the task force concept was used very effectively just this past year with the finance task force, which led and assisted a very difficult budgeting process for the city in the budget year that we're in now. Those of us who were in Elmhurst in 1987 remember those days very vividly, and many of us got to revisit some of them during this summer. But the aftermath of the 1987 floods was a significant, very significant series of events and actions that the city took, DuPage County took, and other governmental entities as well, that really put in place a number of things after 1987, millions of dollars invested, that actually made this situation less onerous than it might have been. Could you just recount for our viewers some of the things that occurred after the 1987 flood?
Yeah, you're true. That there were some successes. I hate to say that in a disaster like this, but the Elmhurst Chicago Stone Quarry that was turned into DuPage County Reservoir. The idea of that quarry is to keep the creek within its banks. At the same time, the city put a berm up along the east side of the creek, and the creek itself never left its banks during the storm in July, which was a great success. The thing was, there's just a heavy amount of rain. It was just getting that rain to the creek, basically. But the berm worked very successful. The quarry worked successfully, and the quarry is designed where when the creek gets to a certain level, it automatically just dumps in the quarry. There's not a magic button that's got to be pushed. It's just there's a weir that goes over and fills it, and then as the rain goes down, it gets pumped back out. And the berm held up fine. In fact, we're getting our berm certified by FEMA right now. We're in the process of doing that right now.
I think it's important for people to know that the things that were put in place after '87 worked very well for the city of Elmhurst as it related to this last catastrophic event, particularly the rains of July 23 and 24. I think it's also a Commonwealth Edison, the whole electric power situation. I know that's also part of what's being looked at.
That's correct. We've been working with Commonwealth Edison for the last few years. I know the southwest side of town has been hit a lot with electrical problems. A lot of it relates with trees. ComEd has come through and done a lot more heavy trimming than they've ever done in the past. We're working with ComEd representatives on a regular basis. I think that's going to be part of our comprehensive plan, too. I think that's going to be something we're going to add to it, not just looking at the storm and the sanitary sewers, but looking at the infrastructure as far as the ComEd infrastructure and see if we can, help to improve that.
Well, the June rains were significant because the city, significant parts of the city lost power. The July rains, most of the city did not lose power, but the rains were more significant. Different storms, different problems, different issues. Putting your fire chief hat on, what kinds of things do you recall from both those storms?
Actually, with the first storm in June for the fire department was actually much busier. We had, within a couple hour time, 170-something calls because of the trees down. We had trees come down on cars, trees come down on people, that kind of thing like that. The July storm, the call volume wasn't as great other than hazard calls. People had a flooded basement, electrical hazards, that type of thing like that. And the interesting thing as we look at the flooding situation is that that's not going to be one easy thing, because if you depend who you talk to, they either flooded because their sanitary backed up, or they flooded because their sump pump failed, or the electricity failed, or the sump pump couldn't keep up, or they had overland flooding where it came in overland and maybe through a basement window or a low point in their home. So it's not just one thing we're trying to fix. It's a number of things that we have to look at comprehensively. Certain parts of town may be a different fix in other parts of town, And it wasn't, it wasn't just the southwest part of Elmhurst where people have focused that on, but there's areas throughout the town that had issues.
Well, if you look at a relief map of the city of Elmhurst, which I know you have looked at, there's not a lot of high points in Elmhurst. Relatively speaking, of course, there's going to be points that are higher than other points, but it's a flat town in the main, and it has a creek going through it, and it has 42,000 plus people who live in it, and it's one of the, you don't want to in any way dismiss it as, whether you want to statistically look at it as a 100-year reign or whether you want to go on the other side of the ledger and call it an act of God and one of these things. I know the city wants to respond and respond proactively and positively, just like they did after 1987. Realistically, Mike, what kind of things, once again from even your fire chief's perspective, when the department gets a call, my basement's flooded, but the lights are still on down there, what do I do? What kind of advice do they get?
Stay out of the water.
Stay out of the water.
Stay out of the water, really. That's the biggest thing as electrical hazard in that type of situation. People want to go down there, they want to check their sump pumps, but it's just not safe to do that. And so until the water recedes, we recommend people don't go in there, in their basement.
Well, on one level, it's common sense to stay out of a flooded basement. On another hand, having experienced a flooded basement and some other catastrophic things in my own home, you've got this overwhelming temptation to protect your property and your family and your livelihood and all of those things, and you're just looking for help. And so when at least as a citizen, I hear the response of the fire department, the response of Public Works, the response of the police department, particularly in the events of the June storms, it gives me a strong feeling of confidence. And yet at the same time, as you watch those waters either come up outside or come up inside, it's the, what do I do now? And I know that the fire department and emergency services give all sorts of thought to catastrophic planning for the community. What if there was a train derailment? What if there was a hazardous spill? Might there be an opportunity to better educate the citizenry on what happens when your house floods? Because I know every single time this happens, I hear the same things stated by people. I didn't know what to do. Do I turn lights off? Do I turn them on? The basement's flooded, but everything's still working down there. I'm just wondering if there isn't a new checklist that perhaps ought to be created, or maybe there is one.
That's a great idea. Maybe that's something we could add to our website. I mean, there's stuff on our website now about ready.gov where you can learn how to protect yourself as far as a disaster, how you prepare for that kind of stuff. But there's not a whole information directly related to flooding.
You hear clean water things and dirty water things, and what conducts electricity and what doesn't, and if there's a wire hanging down, of course, you stay away from the wire. That's common sense, but what exactly do you do? Do you call the fire department when your basement's flooded? I mean, obviously some people did, but is that the protocol?
If you feel there's a hazard, that's to be the protocol. Anytime you think there's a hazard, you're beyond your control, 911. So,
what would you say is a best guess? And I realize I'm asking you to guesstimate, but people are watching this program in September. By the end of September, just to give us the full gamut of the month, the task force will most likely be working. What will be the status, do you think, of the civil engineering review?
Right now, we've hired Chris Burke Engineering for the short term. He's going to, until we got to do a qualification-based selection process. It's a process set up by the state of Illinois when you're looking for professional service. That is normally about a 60-day process. And we're hoping that I expedite it as quick as possible because we want to have that engineering firm on board with the task force. So they're working together rather than the task force coming up with some ideas and the engineer coming in after saying, you know what, engineering-wise, that's probably not the best idea. So we're working to try to get those both developed at the same time with staff, the engineer, the elected officials, and the task force to all work together moving this thing forward. I mean, last night in the city council meeting, there was a committee of a whole meeting. Before that, there was 8 different items. So the elected officials are doing the best they can. They're thinking of, I'll try to think outside the box. What are things we can do now that can help? And there's a number of things that refer to different committees. So the comprehensive plan was agreed upon, the engineer was agreed upon, and the other things will be sent to the committees and work those through the process.
Well, I know that Mayor DeCiani and City Manager Borchert and all 14 of the aldermen have this as their absolute priority. It's so interesting because when something like this happens, the priorities always change, and they change to, you know, meet the crises, but then you go forward and the task force and the other things that you just mentioned. At the same time, during this whole episode, particularly the July rains, I know I personally witnessed some pretty amazing things going on in neighborhoods where cords were running across streets and folks were pulling, you know, bringing in pumps and sandbagging and doing whatever they could to help their neighbors. And if they weren't in trouble, they were making sure that other people were taken care of. Any particular things you saw that come to mind in that vein?
No, I agree exactly with you. I mean, that's one thing about Elmhurst. It's a community. People care. You said about the extension cords, the generators. If I had a generator, I'd share it with my neighbor. You saw that all over the place. You know, no one left their neighbor hanging high and dry. They helped them everywhere they
Actually,
possibly
hang
could.
and dry would have been a good thing to do to your neighbor, but I know exactly what you mean. I think it really was an opportunity, once again, for Elmhurst to come together, particularly neighborhoods. I know oftentimes, and I know you've heard this too, you know, I live next door to them, but I really don't know them. And in these kinds of circumstances, all of a sudden it really doesn't matter.
Right.
If you can help, you help.
Right.
Particularly as it relates to the elderly or other folks that just simply may not have the means or the ability to do the kinds of things that at least have to be considered during very unusual circumstances.
Right, I agree. There was over on Parkside, there was an area where an elderly woman had her basement flooded, and there was a number of neighbors over there taking her carpet out to the Parkway for something she couldn't do. So those are really great things to see, that people step up to help others in situations like this.
Any other things you would like to share, Mike, in our time together tonight?
I would just like to say that, you know, I know Mayor DeCiani, elected officials, this is a priority to them, and they're going to work on this until we get some kind of resolution. Help people be patient, because it's not just one problem, and it's not just in one area. It's different problems in different areas, and we're going to work with the staff, with the elected officials, the task force, to really do whatever we can to improve the system we have in place right now. I mean, if you look at the sewers right now, the stormwater sewers, for instance, the normal design is a 5 to 10 year event. That's what they're designed for. This is well over a 100-year event, so the system just couldn't handle the rain that came down. It wasn't a matter of the system's not working, operating properly. They were operating the way they were designed to operate. It just couldn't get the water to the creek, basically, is what the...
Yeah, it was clearly a circumstance well beyond any kind of system that you would design.
I would say we're continuing to communicate through the website. I mean, there's a lot of information on there right now. Anytime something new comes about, we post it on the website. So I'm sure by September there's going to be a lot more on the website. So if anybody needs information, it's there. Or, you know, call City Hall. We'll help you in where we can. If you have specific problems, we'll send out a staff member. We'll send out an engineer to take a look at your specific problem and do whatever we can to make suggestions of how you can improve your system.
And also on the website, I know any update on the state and federal disaster relief possibilities, that'll all be posted as well.
Right. We just posted yesterday the information on getting a low-interest loan from the state of Illinois. So that's on the site now.
Well, thank you, Mike. Trying times for all of us, but city staff charged with keeping citizens safe and keeping citizens healthy and well in Elmhurst. It's a great deal of stress to put staff under as well, and I know fire and police and public works did an outstanding job as they often do, usually do, in fact. So thank you for being here. This is Mike Kopp, the Assistant City Manager and the Fire Chief of the City of Elmhurst. Thank you very much. We're going to take a short break. When we come back in our second segment tonight, we'll have an Elmhurst resident who deals with crises around the world. We'll be right back.
We live in some of the best communities in Illinois. We care about our neighbors. We work hard to preserve our quality of life. But there's something we forget about in Elmhurst. A river runs through it, and it's up to us to protect it. Our storm drains flow to Salt Creek, and that means our harmful waste does too. So try using fewer chemicals on your lawn. Avoid leaking fluids from cars. And grow native flowers and plants to absorb more rainwater. Don't muddy the waters. Do your part to clean up Salt Creek.
Hello, my name is Battalion Chief Don Novak with the Elmhurst Fire Department. Did you know that over 85% of the child passenger safety seats are installed incorrectly? Here at the Elmhurst Fire Department, we offer a free child passenger safety seat inspection. All you need to do is call City Hall at area code 630-530-3090 for an appointment. Area code 630-530-3090. Because we care about your children.
Welcome back to Elmhurst Now. And this is a shelter box. And we're going to find out from Mark Dyer, Elmhurst resident and Elmhurst Rotarian, just, Mark, what's a shelter box?
Basically, a shelter box is international disaster relief. When there's a disaster anywhere in the world, we bring shelter boxes to victims. And what's in a shelter box is basically enough camping equipment for a group of 10 to live up to 6 months. So it includes a tent, a stove, blankets, toolkit so they can start to rebuild their lives, water purification, everything they need to live except for food. And food is usually sourced locally.
Now, I know this idea was developed in Great Britain, a Rotarian in Great Britain, and I know you'll be able to expound on this, but how fast has this movement grown?
It's really unbelievable. This year was our 10-year anniversary. In that 10-year period, it went from the first idea and the first shelter boxes being delivered in 2001 in Jakarta, India, to we've now been to over 135 disasters in more than 90 countries throughout the world. So it's really pretty amazing.
And for shelter box, a disaster is everything from civil unrest to earthquake to flood and any place in between?
Absolutely. Tsunamis, volcanoes, literally wherever a group of people have lost their home, their place to live, and they're at the risk of loss of life because they have to live outside in the elements is when we usually go.
Now, when did you hear about Shelter Box?
I heard about Shelter Box about 3 years ago through Rotary. As you mentioned, I'm a Rotarian. Heard about it, thought it sounded like it'd be something up my alley. Called them, contacted them, asked to apply to the Shelter Box Response Team program. I did eventually get accepted. Went through about a year plus of training for that, and then have been a response team member for the last 2 years.
Now, as a response team member, what does that obligation mean?
Basically, it means you're available to go anywhere in the world within 48 hours. We go in with the aid to make sure that it gets delivered to the disaster zones. It's not held up in customs. It's not held up by local politicians. It gets up into the disaster area. And then within each disaster situation, that the most needy receive the aid first. Usually our criteria is people most at risk, so that's women with children, elderly, handicapped, or people living with severe illnesses.
Now, when you were making the decision to be involved, the classic notion of wanting to make a difference, knowing you, is something that I know was part of the equation. But what about Shelter Box as a concept appealed to you?
Yeah, you know, it's, as a Rotarian, as a humanitarian, it's a great issue. But for me personally, it addressed the issue that people were living, living their lives fine before something out of their control hit them or happened to them. So for me personally, I felt that that was people that needed the help most. You know, it was something they couldn't control. It wasn't just poverty or lack of education. It was something that was out of their control, and they needed help and needed a way to survive in the short term.
Where have you been deployed to this point in time?
Right. Since I passed through the SRT program, which is the response team program.
And that was when?
Almost 2 years ago now.
Okay.
I was in northern Somalia, which is a province called Somaliland. We were dealing with war refugees up there. Last fall I was in Niger for almost a month plus. We were dealing with flooding there. About 30,000 people were homeless there. This winter, right after Haiti happened, well, within 24 hours, I was down in Miami. We were running a logistics team out of there. We brought about 190,000 pounds worth of shelter boxes through Miami International in the first 2.5 weeks of Haiti. So I was down there for about 4 weeks. And then in spring of this year, I was down physically in Haiti for a deployment down there too.
What's the coordination like between the relief agencies? Does the Red Cross lead? Does some other organization lead? Is it country specific?
It definitely depends on the disaster and what aid organizations are in country. In some disasters, we're the only ones. In other disasters like Haiti that have a global scale, all the other aid organizations there. At one point in Haiti, there were over 500 aid organizations in Haiti alone. In a massive deployment like that, it's usually run by the UN. The UN has a disaster relief arm that's down there, and they would coordinate all the different aid agencies.
In the case of the civil unrest that you mentioned in Somaliland, was there ever a point in time when you weren't exactly sure what side of the relief effort you needed to be on?
No. In the area we were in, while it is, it's not an active war zone. They wouldn't send us into an active war zone.
Okay.
It was on the fringe, and most of the people we were dealing with were clearly refugees from the fighting.
And the scope in Niger was 30,000 or in that neighborhood.
Right.
Would you even venture a scope in Haiti? I mean, it was virtually the entire country.
It was the entire country. There wasn't a person that wasn't affected one way or another. In Port-au-Prince, the UN estimated about 1.3 million people homeless. But even people that were outside of the actual quake zone were so affected because they had so many refugees coming into their areas and taxing their supply systems, their ability to get food and water and all those kind of things, that it really was unbelievable how much it taxed every citizen in Haiti.
Let's back up again just a little bit. You come home one day and say to your wife and family, you know what, I think I'm going to train to be a disaster relief specialist and go all over the world potentially on 48-hour notice.
Right.
How'd that go over?
My family was extremely supportive, and before I did apply to it, I did sit down with my wife and my children and said, you know, I'm kind of thinking about this, what do you think? And they were amazingly supportive. Thought, hey, this is great. You know, I know it's hard on my family when I'm not here, but you know, they understand the reason for it. It's great.
So what's it like when you land in Haiti with a plane full of shelter boxes? What's the first thing that happens?
Every disaster is different, and really the level of cooperation depends on the government you're with, depends on local authorities, depends on the people in the community. So there isn't really a straight playbook that says every disaster goes this way. Typically our first job is we're coming in, we're assessing the situation, seeing if there's a need there. As our gear arrives, our first need is to get that through customs, get it imported, really get control of that equipment in country, and then work with locals to work on distribution. We try not to be the foreign aid agency that comes in and says, you know, a village is wiped out, we can't help everybody. We don't want to be the ones that come in and say, yes, you're going to receive a tent, you're not. We really sit down with the local authorities, whether that's government, whether it's village elders, whether it's an elected council, and say, you know, we have this much gear to help this many people. We want you to tell us who your most at-risk people are. Who's, you know, in the worst shape, who's physically meets these criteria of, you know, handicapped, elderly, women with children, and let them decide and then help distribute aid with their help. We very much want the victims to take this on as part of their community, not us doing for them, but them helping themselves. It's very empowering.
Now, when you're there providing relief, you're living in the same conditions that the people that you're helping are living
Generally speaking, we're living in tents and in the same equipment that are in the
Same
boxes.
right.
So we know if it's good or bad, and if there's problems, we're constantly updating our gear. But it also depends on the situation. Somaliland, when I was there, the local government wanted us out of the camps by dark for security reasons. So in that case, we lived in a different area, in a secured area.
Now, I know you briefly touched on what's in a shelter box. I know the tent and blankets and water purification and a cook stove, but I understand there's even coloring books in here.
There is. It's two of the things that are kind of out of, we do send in an activity kit for the kids with crayons and coloring books. And many children are very traumatized. They've lost their home. In many cases, they've lost all their possessions. Mom and dad might be out working on logistics, getting food, taking care of the family, so in many cases they're left more on their own. So it's something to occupy them, for kids to feel a sense of possessions, things like that. It's actually a very important part of the kit. We also send along a toolkit that really helps the family. There's hammers, saws, pliers, wire cutters, rope in there, and that's really so the family can start to rebuild their life too, and start to rebuild their home as it was.
Now, I know as you've gotten into this and gone on your deployments and come back that you've become an active local spokesperson for Shelter Box. And this program is an opportunity for you to share a little bit about how people can help Shelter Box, learn more about it, all of the things that go with your involvement.
Yeah, I do speak to other groups. I speak to civic organizations, basically throughout the whole western suburbs. So if anybody's interested, they surely can contact us. They can contact us on our website, which is www.shelterboxusa.org. They can contact me directly through our website and arrange for a speaking engagement. But we do solicit donations for people that want to sponsor boxes. Individuals or groups can sponsor an entire box, and that's a pretty neat part of the program. Is if a group or an individual sponsors a complete shelter box, they actually get a tracking number and can physically track that box as it goes through a deployment. So they'll find out 3-4 months from the time they've sent in their donation where their box went. So they can then go on our website and check and see pictures of boxes in that disaster. So they know their box went to the earthquake in Chile or flooding in Mexico or flooding in Uganda or wherever in the world those boxes go.
Is there a number attached to Shelter Box in terms of its impact, its dollar impact over the last year or in that neighborhood?
This has been our biggest year. A lot of that was because of Haiti. In Haiti alone, as I said, of the 1.3 million people that were affected, we had over 200,000 people living in shelter box tents in Haiti alone, so a very large portion. This year we've been to over 14 disasters already throughout the world. Many of them we wouldn't hear about on the news here, but they're very, very regional in many cases. And as I said, we've been to over 135 disasters.
I know you've taken it a step further, and that is become involved with Shelter Box USA. Would you share just a little bit about how a program that started in Great Britain now is in U.S., just the organizational structure, perhaps?
It's really pretty amazing. As I said, it started in Great Britain. It was one man's idea, a Rotarian. His name's Tom Henderson. He saw the news one night, saw people receiving aid off a truck. People were basically throwing loaves of bread off the truck, and he just didn't think that was right. Kind of thought about it, went home and said, you know, if I lost my house, I'd go in the garage, I'd pull my camping equipment out, and we'd be fine. So with that, he went to his Rotary Club, the Rotary Club of Helston Lizard, England. They started Shelter Box in 2001, and really it's spread through the Rotary network since then. Rotarians all over the world have supported it, just raising funds or different ways. We have affiliates now in 11 different countries, the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Belgium, Germany, France, and we're adding affiliate countries all over the world. So it's really a great cause, and people understand it. It's a really a pretty simple solution to a complex problem. And when people want to know how to help, when they see something on the news, this is really a direct way they can help.
Well, I know the last couple of years the local Rotary Club of Elmhurst has had Shelter Box as a primary program that they're providing assistance for.
Yeah, the whole western suburbs has been great. The Elmhurst Rotary Club, Noon Rotary Club has been very supportive. The Morning Club, Addison Rotary, I mean really all of northern Illinois has been really amazing support.
And you took it a step forward. You're actually on the board now of Shelter Box USA, is that correct?
Yes, I'm a member of the board of directors now of Shelter Box USA.
Now what does that mean exactly?
It means we're the governing body of Shelter Box. As any nonprofit, is run. A lot of it is governance and regulations and making sure that your donor's money is accountable and spent for accordingly and according to the mission as it's stated. So it's no different than a board of directors of any other corporation, nonprofit organization.
Now I know that Shelter Box is 10 years old because you've shared that already, but I also know that very recently you and your son, in recognition of that, along with some other Shelter Box Rotarians, climbed a big mountain somewhere. Where might that be?
We did. We went to Africa and climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, which is the highest peak in Africa. There were 12 of us total, 8 Brits, a Canadian, me and my son were the 2 Americans, and then there was a gentleman from Ireland too. And they were all in response team members or supporters of Shelter Box. We did it to raise awareness. We also did donation at one of the local schools in Tanzania. We bought math and English books for the entire school, which really was kind of our humanitarian effort to Tanzania. Obviously, we raised over $20,000 to Shelter Box for that, and then we were able to climb the mountain too. And I'm very happy to report that all 12 did finish the climb and made the summit, so it was great. And a great experience for me personally, and something that was pretty amazing to be able to share with my 17-year-old son.
Absolutely. Now, I asked you earlier about what it feels like when you get off the plane in Haiti and you're starting a deployment. Mm-hmm. What does it feel like when you get back on the plane? I mean, the disaster's not over.
No, it's not. It is a multitude of feelings. As even when you're on the disaster, one of the upside and the downside, it is definitely a job of peaks and valleys. You go through it on a daily basis. Some of the peaks are, obviously you're helping people. In many instances, you're changing or saving lives. And you really see it in their eyes when you're helping distribute aid and move it. Extremely rewarding, as you can imagine. The downside of that is you are distributing aid and you can't help everybody. So there are many times where there is another family that is absolutely just as deserving as the one you just were able to help, but you just can't help everybody. So, the great part is you've got the ups and the downs. You're dealing with a lot of ranges of emotions, and, that's part of the job.
How often might you expect, once again, we don't know the number of disasters, but how often would you be deployed?
A typical response team member, and it definitely depends on the individual. We are volunteers, so you can take yourself on and off in availability. Would be anywhere between 1 and 4 times a year would be kind of the average. Some people are way more active, with the most probably being 7 or 8 times a year, and others may go out once or twice a year. So it really depends on availability, what's going on in the world, what our need is, where your location is, a lot of different factors.
A specific instance, story or two that come to mind from any of your deployments?
They do. Hard to do a specific because there's so many.
Sure.
I guess the best is almost a compilation of everything, which is really the reward that you get. You're literally sitting dealing with people that have a glazed over look and they don't know what they're going to do. They don't know how they're going to take care of their family. And you show up and you show them what they have. And in many cases, third world especially, the tent we're bringing them may be better living conditions than they were in before. Just this feeling and the sense of relief that you see in the families that, you know what, we're going to be okay. We're going to get through this and we're going to get back to our life. And that's really pretty amazing feeling.
Now, not everybody, obviously, is in the position or in the of more robust enough health or anything to do it the way that you've done it. And obviously writing a check, what else can people do?
Of course, donations are our lifeblood. You know, that's what pays for all the equipment. The equipment that's given is a gift to the family that receives it. We never take anything back, so it's all new equipment that goes out and it's a gift to the family. So yes, donations are by far, but there are many other ways to help. We need people to go out and talk about us. Most people have never heard of ShelterBox. So we need volunteers to go out and talk to friends, families, groups, organizations, tell them about us, and then use their talents in any way they can. Business want to donate services, materials. We need those things. We need everything that a worldwide organization would need.
Well, you need everything to put in the box.
We do.
So, well, Mark, I very much appreciate you being here tonight. And perhaps you want to give that website one more time.
Sure. It's www.shelterboxusa.org. And there's everything about the organization, list of all the deployments we've been in, pictures. It's really a pretty amazing website, and I'd encourage everybody to go and check it out.
Well, and a pretty amazing story personally as well, Mark.
Thank
you very much.
Thanks, Ken.
This has been Elmhurst Now, stories of the people of Elmhurst, Illinois. I think you'll agree we've had two fascinating guests this evening. I'm Ken Bartels. We'll see you again.
Hi, I'm John Quigley, President and CEO of the Elmhurst Chamber of Commerce and Industry. In these challenging economic times, it's imperative that our residents and businesses band together to not only shop Elmhurst, but buy Elmhurst whenever possible. We have great stores in our city center, Spring Road, Butterfield Road, York and Villette Streets, St. Charles and Route 83, North Avenue and Lake Street, along North York and even Grand Avenue. I ask for your help. Let's keep our tax dollars in Elmhurst.
Hi, I'm Elmhurst Police Chief Steve Neubauer. Elmhurst is a great place to live and work. However, we are not crime-free. Many people in our community become victims of crime simply because they did not lock their belongings. I would ask you to do two things. First, lock your car, house, and bike. Secondly, call 911 to report suspicious activity to the Elmhurst Police Department. The Elmhurst Police Department reminds you to lock it or lose it.
I really came from the idea that what would I need for my family in a disaster? Imagine a situation where you've lost everything and a green box arrives. Contents of the box are very simple things but make a huge change in a disaster. Waterproof ground sheets, blankets. We have a 10-person tent we've designed ourselves, enough for an extended family of 10 people. Cooking pots and pans and knife, forks and spoons. A cooker. We have a water purification system. We have a toolkit. So basically a life-saving, life-changing inventory. Very basic stuff, but very essential stuff. We put together a team to go out there within hours and immediately started moving our boxes out to the affected area. We actually had an Antonov 124, one of the largest cargo aircraft in the world. We put enough equipment in that for 40,000 people. So a huge, huge effort for us, and that's what catapulted us onto the world stage. We've been involved now with over 70 disasters in 50 countries around the world, ranging from floods, volcanoes, earthquakes, typhoons, hurricanes. So a box would have to be packed here. It would then leave here on a truck, obviously, go to a major airport, and then the work really starts. In disasters, there's no infrastructure, no roads. They've been carried in wheelbarrows, they've been carried on camels, and they've been physically carried by people. I actually found this box in my local hardware store. It's become quite iconic now around the world.
Winds of over 100 miles an hour came through this area, together with a storm surge of water that rose about 15 feet and has swept away an awful lot of the buildings. We've just got our final consignment of boxes and we're putting up tents as we speak.
يعني دبان ووسخ وبرف وشتاء يخش من جوا الخيمة، من جوات برا الخيمة يخش. لا بناخدش هنا مساء. كثير مبسوطين عليها لأنه أول إشي لو شتت الدنيا لو مطرت ما بخش علينا شتاء.
Money is the lifeblood of any charity. To give one's time is invaluable. To give one's money is also very useful. And my message to people is don't do nothing. Do something. We can all make a difference, however small that contribution is. At the end of the day, it's only a box with some stuff in it. But it's that collective will of a huge amount of people, and a lot of skill and endeavour goes into it. We want to be helping 500,000 people a year within 5 years. And we intend to get on with the job.